Good morning. This is Carter Conlon. Welcome to my morning. And I've got good news. Just a few days ago, Casey had her pony. His name is Dash. It's a male. And he's a beautiful little pony. I'll be introducing him to you as soon as the weather gets nice. Excuse me. It's been cold and rainy here, so I want to wait so we can go outside. He's a gorgeous little pony. And he loves to run and leap and jump already. He was out with Casey yesterday. He's just running like the wind. And he's starting to get friendly, starting to be able to come to us, and he's getting used to human touch and such like. So you'll get to meet Dash, hopefully, in just a day or two when we get some sunshine. Now, today I want to talk to you about the forward motion of faith, may I call it that. Faith is always moving forward. Now, I may have touched on this before, but I really do think it bears repeating. Because faith that is stagnant is not really faith anymore. And the moment we stop going forward is the moment we run into trouble. Remember King David, the moment he stopped going to battle with the rest of the forces is the day that he ran into trouble because he was not operating in faith anymore. Faith has a forward motion. Now let me explain that a little more clearly. For example, Abraham in Genesis left Haran at 75 years of age and went out into a place. So he moved according to where God was leading him in a forward motion into a place of faith. David ran with a forward motion into the valley to face Goliath and brought about one of the greatest military victories, I think, in biblical history. We see Esther with a forward motion going into the king and saying, if he doesn't move the scepter towards me, then I'm going to perish. So if I perish, I perish. One of the more famous statements in all of Old Testament history. And you'll constantly see it. Jesus Christ himself was always moving forward. He didn't, see, this is the point, he didn't stay in a particular house. I've been to Capernaum, and it's quite stunning to think that of all the foundations left in Capernaum, Jesus lived in one of those houses. But nevertheless, he didn't just stay there and say to the disciples, bring the people to me, one at a time. But he went out. He was moving constantly. Faith is always moving. He moved to where human need was. Now, our tendency as the people of God, especially people of God who have known a measure of spiritual awakening, may I call it that, is to want to camp on that place, stay on that place, talk about that place, and we actually cease to move forward. That's how churches that were birthed in revival are now museums, or empty, or sold to become like a thrift shop or something like that, when it used to be a place where the presence of God was. There's a point where the people stop moving forward in faith, and they stay stagnant, and they lose heart for the present in many cases and start talking only about the past. Of course, that can only last so long. Matthew chapter 17 says, after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. So something was happening to him that Peter, James, and John had never seen anything like this before. Like, can you imagine his countenance? His face is shining like the sun. And his clothes are becoming, and the scripture says, as white as light in the New King James Version. And not only that, Moses and Elijah appeared to them and were talking with them. Moses and Elijah, two of the more famous prophets in the Old Testament, are now on this Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus, Peter, James, and John. And they're experiencing a moment in history that perhaps nobody has had any chance to experience or might never experience on this side of eternity. So Peter responds with the natural inclination of the human heart. And he says, Peter answered to Jesus, Matthew 17:4, Lord, it's good for us to be here. So it's true. It's a good place. If you've been in a church that has known spiritual awakening, that's a good place. Thank God for that good place. If you've done something or God's used your life and good things have happened, that's a good thing, and it's a good place. If you wish, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. So this is the inclination of the human heart. When God does something that only God can do, we want to camp there. Peter's basically saying, let's make dwelling places here, and let's just sit here and let's talk about the Mount of Transfiguration from now till you know, till heaven's kingdom comes down to earth. I mean, let's just stay here. Let's talk about it. And that's the human tendency. If a church has known a great measure of spiritual awakening, the tendency is to build a place there and create, kind of a comfortable place, and then talk about what God did or is doing forever and ever, and cease to move forward. You know, I can just see Peter, James, and John with reluctance, because not only did they see Moses, Elijah, and see Jesus transfigured, but they also heard the audible voice of God the Father when he said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him." I mean, it just doesn't get any better than that. You've got the Old Testament prophets, you've got Jesus Christ transfigured, you've got the voice of God the Father. You're alone on this mountain. I mean, the tendency when you've experienced something like that is build. But I've seen that before. I saw one time a great, well, I consider a great move of God come to nothing, because they moved from experiencing the presence of God to wanting to build something to celebrate it, and the whole focus turned to the building. And now today you have this great edifice with hardly any people in it, from what I understand, because they just didn't move with God when God was moving. They wanted to sit and build something, which is not, I suppose, a bad thing, but as long as your focus doesn't shift to there, and as long as you don't stay stationary there, but you're still willing to move with God when he moves. Because the next thing that happened is that Jesus, in verse 9, says, came down from the mountain. He didn't stay there. I mean, even for Jesus, it must have been a very comforting place to hear his Father's voice, and to be able to consult with some of the greatest friends he'd ever had in the Old Testament, and to have his disciples there with him. But he didn't stay there. He moved down the mountain, because at the bottom of that mountain was a man with a child, a son, who was suffering terribly from fits and seizures, falling into the fire and often into the water. You see, he was needed there. And as the Church of Jesus Christ, and as individual believers, we're never called to camp in one place. We're called to keep moving in the Spirit to where God would have us to go. And it's always about human need, always. It's not about satisfying our own desires. You know, one day we'll be in heaven. One day there's going to be no more sighing, no more sorrow, no more tears, etc., etc. But for other people, it's not the case for them. They've not had an encounter with God, and they need us to go to them. And if we cease to go, that's when faith, in my opinion, for what it's worth, ceases to be faith. It's just recognition. It's just a mental assent to a group of facts that we've come to believe are real, but we're not walking in that faith any longer. James, the apostle, said, you say you have faith and I have works, or that I have faith and you have works, whichever way it was. And he says, you show me what you have, but I'll show you what I believe by what I do. And I'm paraphrasing it, but that's essentially what he was saying. I'll show you what I believe by how that belief system acts itself out in everyday life. And he uses the example of feeding somebody who's hungry, or clothing somebody who's not warm. It's really simple. True faith will always move us into human need. There's no way around it. True faith will not shy away from the battle. True faith will leave where it is, as Abraham did, and go to where God's calling it. True faith, as Esther did, will, at the risk of its own peril, will go into the king for the sake of saving other people, and especially those, in Esther's case, of her own household. That's what faith is all about. So faith is a walk. You know, that's why the Bible, we call it the walk of faith. It's not the talk of faith, it's the walk of faith. A lot of people just talk faith, but that's all they've got. They've got no walk, just a lot of talk. And I'm just wondering sometimes, is that really faith? Or is it just an agreement with a bunch of facts that we know to be true? No, true faith is a walk. Let your faith walk be a true walk today. Don't be afraid. All through biblical history, when God has called people by faith to go to a place they've never gone before, there's always been victory. There's always been glory come to his name. It's not going to be any different for you. You just take the step. Go to where God's leading you to go. Do what God's calling you to do. There's somebody out there that needs to know that Jesus loves them. They need to know that there's hope for their future. They need to know God can do for them what he's done for you. Let your faith be a walk. Let it not be just talk. And start today by just saying, Lord, what would you have me to do? What would you have me to do? How can the faith that I have be now put into action and make a difference in somebody else's life for the glory of God? This is Carter Conlon, and welcome to my morning. And if you do what I just said, I guarantee you, my morning will make your day. See you again tomorrow. God bless you.